Everyone in the room chose the wrong target. The deadliest person in the scenario was the one nobody even looked at. The day of the Advanced Threat Assessment examination, I walked into Chamber 7 with the same confidence as about 60 other students who were all equally sure they had this whole tactical analysis thing figured out. The chamber itself was impressive. I will give the academy that much. Circular design, tiered seating that spiraled up like an amphitheater, and a central projection platform that could generate holographic scenarios so realistic you could practically smell the cordite and fear. Students filed in with the usual noise, the usual chaos. Corleans stomped in with their excessive bulk, taking up 2 seats each because apparently their species never learned about spatial efficiency. The Vox contingent clicked and whistled to each other in their harmonic language, their chrome-plated skulls gleaming under the overhead lights. A cluster of mindweavers drifted in last, those creepy telepathic floaters who always seemed to be listening to conversations you were not even having out loud. I grabbed a seat in the middle section. Row 5, right on the aisle, good view of the projection platform. Close enough to hear everything clearly, far enough back that I would not get called on first. Tactical positioning, see? I was learning. The energy in the room was electric, competitive. That specific kind of academic aggression where everyone wants to prove they are the smartest person present. The Advanced Threat Assessment examination was not just any test. This was the exam that determined your tactical specialization track, your post-graduation assignment potential, and let us be honest, your bragging rights for the next decade. Pass with high marks, you were looking at command track positions, advisory roles, maybe even a spot in the Galactic Defense Intelligence Division. Fail or score poorly, enjoy your career flying supply routes to mining colonies in the outer reaches. So, yeah, everyone was tense, everyone was focused, everyone was mentally preparing to demonstrate their superior analytical abilities. Well, almost everyone. 3 rows ahead of me, sitting in one of those middle seats that nobody really wants because you cannot make a quick exit, was a human. She had dark hair pulled back in a simple tail, wore the standard academy uniform like everyone else, and was currently slouched in her seat like she was waiting for a particularly boring lecture to end. Her datapad sat unopened on her lap. Her eyes were half closed. If I did not know better, I would have said she was about to fall asleep. Her name was Kira Chen. I knew this because we had shared exactly one class together in our first term, basic xenobiology, and she had spent the entire semester looking exactly this uninterested while somehow scoring in the top 5%. Humans were weird like that. They could look completely disengaged and still absorb information like some kind of cognitive sponge. But here is the thing. Nobody was worried about Kira. Nobody was sizing her up as competition. The Krellians were not glancing her way, mentally noting a rival. The Mindweavers were not bothering to skim surface thoughts from her direction. Even the Vox, who prided themselves on analyzing everyone as a potential threat, seemed to look right past her. She was human, sure, but humans were still relatively new to the galactic community. 50 years of contact, maybe? 60? They had decent enough technology. They had been accepted into the academy program, but they were not exactly known for military dominance. They were the species that sent musicians and artists and weird philosophical poets to the cultural exchange programs. They ran excellent medical research facilities. They made surprisingly good food. Tactical brilliance, combat theory mastery. That was not the human reputation. So Kira Chen sat there in row 3, looking like she would rather be literally anywhere else. And every single student in that chamber dismissed her as irrelevant, just another mid-tier participant who would give a decent enough assessment, score somewhere in the acceptable range, and move on with her life. I remember thinking that exact thought. At least I will probably score better than the human. Yeah, about that. The examination proctor entered through the main doors, and the room fell silent immediately. Commander Thrace was a Dorvathian, which meant he was built like a biological tank, had 3 eyes that could track independent targets, and possessed exactly 0 patience for stupidity. His combat record was legendary. 43 campaigns, 16 decorated operations, and rumor had it he once held off an entire boarding party with nothing but a broken plasma rifle and what the official Erfurt described as creative problem-solving. He did not walk to the center platform. He stomped. Each step echoed through the chamber like a countdown. Seated, he barked even though we were already sitting. Datapads active. Recording protocols engaged. 60 datapads lit up simultaneously. Mine included. Commander Thrace's 3 eyes swept across the room, lingering on various students just long enough to make them uncomfortable. When his gaze passed over row 3, over Kira, He paused for exactly half a second longer than necessary. I noticed it, but I did not understand it. Not yet. Today's examination is simple, Thrace announced, his voice carrying that particular military cadence that made every sentence sound like a tactical order. You will be presented with a scenario, a conflict situation featuring multiple potential hostile actors. Your task is to identify which individual poses the greatest threat, explain your reasoning, and propose a neutralization strategy. Simple enough. We had trained for this. Threat assessment was fundamental to tactical operations. You will be graded on accuracy, reasoning depth, and strategic thinking, Thrace continued. Time limit is 90 seconds per presentation. You will be called randomly. His mandibles clicked together in what might have been a smile. Choose wisely. The holographic projectors hummed to life, and the central platform shimmered with rendered light. The scenario began loading, and in row 3, Kira Chen finally opened her eyes, straightened slightly in her seat, and for just a moment the bored expression on her face was replaced with something else, something that looked an awful lot like amusement. The holographic scenario materialized in full detail, and I have got to admit, the Academy did not cheap out on the rendering quality. The projection showed a contested urban zone, probably meant to represent one of those border world colonies that changed hands every few years depending on who had the bigger fleet that month. Collapsed buildings, debris scattered across broken streets, the kind of environment where visibility was garbage and ambush points were everywhere. And standing in various positions throughout this charming disaster area were 7 individuals. Commander Thrace gestured at the projection with one massive arm. This scenario takes place approximately 40 minutes after a failed orbital bombardment. Ground forces from multiple factions have converged on this location. Civilian evacuation is incomplete. Infrastructure is compromised. Your mission briefing indicated potential high-value targets in the area. He paused, letting that sink in. Identify the greatest threat. You have 5 minutes to analyze before presentations begin. The room erupted into frantic activity. Datapads lit up with notation software, styluses started scratching, and I could hear at least 3 different students muttering tactical assessments under their breath like some kind of academic prayer. I focused on the 7 figures in the projection. First one, immediately obvious. A Krellian shock trooper, full combat armor, carrying what had to be a Mark 7 plasma cannon. Those things could punch through reinforced bunker walls. He was positioned behind a half-collapsed storefront. Decent cover, good sight lines down 2 intersecting streets. Textbook defensive positioning for heavy weapons support. Threat level? Extreme. That was going in my notes. Second figure. A Vox infiltrator. Because of course there was a Vox infiltrator. They were crouched on top of a ruined building 3 stories up, holding some kind of long-range energy rifle. Vox had naturally enhanced targeting systems built into their optical nerves, which made them absolutely terrifying snipers. From that elevated position they could cover probably 80% of the scenario area. Also going in my notes as extreme threat. Third figure. A Scaran berserker. And oh boy, those were bad news in close quarters. Scaran had this lovely evolutionary feature where combat stress triggered a biological rage state that made them essentially immune to pain and doubled their already impressive strength. This one was carrying dual vibroblades and looked ready to turn anything nearby into component parts. Extreme threat at close range. Noted. Fourth figure. A Mindweaver coordinator, hovering about 2 meters off the ground, near what used to be a transit station. Mindweavers could not do direct telepathic control. That was illegal and biologically impossible for most species anyway, but they could coordinate entire squads through shared tactical awareness. One Mindweaver could turn a disorganized group into a synchronized killing unit. Strategic threat. Definitely going in the assessment. Fifth figure. A Thalorian scout. One of my own species actually. Positioned in a doorway with active camouflage gear and what looked like sensor equipment. Scouts were force multipliers providing real-time intelligence and target designation for heavier units. Moderate threat. Support role. Check. Sixth figure. A Dorvathian combat engineer. Commander Thrace's species. Working on something near a vehicle wreckage. Combat engineers were dangerous because they could turn environmental elements into weapons, improvised explosives, structural traps. All that creative mayhem that made urban combat so unpredictable. High threat potential. Added to the list. And then, there was the 7th figure, a human, medical officer based on the markings on their uniform. They were sitting on a chunk of rubble, looked absolutely exhausted, had a standard medical pack next to them, and appeared to be checking something on a handheld scanner. No visible weapons, No combat armor, just basic field gear and what was probably 72 hours without sleep written all over their face. I glanced at the human, made a quick note, medical personnel, non-combatant, and immediately went back to analyzing the actual threats. Around me I could hear other students doing the same thing. Lots of attention on the Krellian with the plasma cannon, plenty of discussion about the Vox sniper. A few people were really focused on the Mindweaver, which made sense from a strategic disruption standpoint. Nobody, and I mean nobody, was spending serious analytical time on the human medical officer. Why would we? Look at the scenario. You had 6 legitimate combat-capable individuals with serious hardware and tactical positioning, and 1 exhausted medic who was probably just trying to figure out which wounded personnel to treat first. In row 3 I saw Kira lean back in her seat, arms crossed, watching the holographic scenario with an expression that somehow managed to combine boredom with something that might have been second-hand embarrassment for us. But I did not know that yet. I was too busy being confident in my threat assessment, circling the Vox sniper as my primary answer. Elevated position, long-range capabilities, species-specific targeting advantages. That was the obvious greatest threat. Anyone could see that. Commander Thrace stood at the edge of the projection platform, those 3 eyes tracking back and forth across the student body, watching us work. Time, he announced, and 60 students stopped writing simultaneously. Presentations begin now. His gaze swept the room. Student Carvex, you are first. A Krellian in the front row stood up, looking pleased with himself. Oh, this was gonna be good, or historically bad. We just did not know it yet. Carvex stood up with the kind of confidence that only comes from being absolutely certain you are about to impress everyone in the room. He was a big guy, even for a Krellian, and when he gestured at the holographic projection, his movements had that theatrical quality of someone who had rehearsed this moment in front of a mirror. The greatest threat, he announced, his voice booming across the chamber, is obviously the Krellian shock trooper with the Mark 7 plasma cannon. Several students nodded. I nodded. That was a solid choice. Observe the positioning, Kovacs continued, using his datapad to highlight sections of the projection. He has superior cover, dual street sightlines, and the firepower to eliminate light vehicles and fortified positions. The Mark 7 has an effective range of 800 meters in urban environments. From his current location, he controls 3 critical choke points, and can provide suppressive fire that would pin down any advancing force. Thrace watched impassively, 3 eyes unblinking. Furthermore, Carvex was really getting into it now. The Krellian physiological advantage in sustained heavy weapons operation means he can maintain fire longer than most species without fatigue degradation. My neutralization strategy would involve either long-range precision elimination via the Vox sniper, or environmental collapse of his position using the combat engineer's demolition capabilities. Carvex sat down, looking extremely pleased with himself. A few students actually gave him approving clicks and hums. Adequate, Thrace said, which coming from him was practically a standing ovation. Student Silith, you are next. A Mindweaver floated upward slightly, their translucent form shimmering with what I had learned to recognize as concentration patterns. I must respectfully disagree with Student Carvex. Silith's voice resonated directly in our heads, which was always unsettling. The greatest threat is clearly myself, the Mindweaver coordinator. Okay, points for boldness. I guess. A Mindweaver in a combat scenario does not function as a single combatant, Silith explained. We are force multipliers. Observe how I am positioned centrally, with telepathic range covering all other combatants. I can coordinate simultaneous actions, share sensory data across multiple viewpoints, and eliminate communication lag entirely. The shock trooper's firepower becomes meaningless if I can alert the Scaran Berserker to his exact position 0.5 seconds before he fires. Actually, that was a pretty good argument. I glanced at my notes, wondering if I should have considered the coordination angle more seriously. Neutralization requires either immediate elimination before battlefield coordination begins, or telepathic jamming technology, which most military forces do not deploy at the squad level. Failing both options, any engagement becomes exponentially more difficult once I establish network connection with allied forces. Silith settled back down, looking smug. Well, as smug as a floating telepathic jellyfish thing could look. Interesting analysis, Thrace commented, his tone revealing absolutely nothing. 3 more students presented. One chose the Vox sniper, spending 6 minutes breaking down angles of fire, kill zone calculations, and the statistical probability of first shot fatalities. Another picked the Scaran Berserker, making a solid case for close-quarters lethality and the psychological impact of facing an enemy that literally could not feel pain. The third went with the combat engineer, arguing that environmental control and improvised explosives presented unpredictable threat vectors. All of them sounded confident. All of them had detailed tactical reasoning. All of them received that same neutral, adequate, or interesting from Commander Thrace, and all of them completely ignored the human medical officer sitting on that chunk of rubble. I checked row 3 again. Kira had not moved, had not taken notes, had not even pulled out her datapad. She just sat there with her arms crossed, watching student after student present their assessments with an expression that I was starting to recognize as barely suppressed amusement. That should have been a warning sign. Student Van. Thrace's voice cut through my thoughts like a plasma torch. Your assessment. Oh good. My turn to sound smart. I stood up, datapad in hand, suddenly very aware that 60 pairs of various optical organs were now focused on me. The greatest threat is the Vox infiltrator, I said, keeping my voice steady. Elevated position at approximately 12 meters. Long-range energy rifle with demonstrated accuracy at distances exceeding 1,000 meters. Vox optical enhancements provide target tracking capabilities that exceed standard military-grade equipment. I highlighted the sniper's position in the hologram. From this location, the Vox has clear sight lines to every other combatant in the scenario. First shot elimination probability on unarmored targets exceeds 90%. Even armored targets would face significant damage from sustained fire. Feeling more confident now, I continued. Additionally, Vox infiltrators are trained in position rotation and evasion protocols. Attempting to close distance for counterattack would require crossing open ground under direct observation. The shock trooper's plasma cannon lacks the precision for anti-sniper work at that range. The berserker cannot reach an elevated target. Even the Mindweaver's coordination advantages become limited against a single independently operating sniper. I took a breath. Neutralization strategy would require either the Thalorian Scout's sensor equipment to pinpoint exact location for indirect fire, or a coordinated distraction allowing the combat engineer to collapse the building structure. I sat down. That felt pretty good, actually. Solid reasoning, tactical considerations, practical neutralization approach. Adequate, Thrace said. Several more students went. A Darvathian chose the combat engineer, their own species, making an impassioned argument about how underestimated environmental manipulation was in modern combat doctrine. A Scaran, predictably, chose the other Scaran, because apparently species loyalty was a thing even in academic exercises. Each presentation was detailed, confident, backed by tactical theory and combat statistics. The room was filling with that particular academic energy where everyone was mentally congratulating themselves on their analytical brilliance. We were all so smart, so well trained, so tactically astute. In row 3, Kira uncrossed her arms, stretched slightly, and yawned. Actually yawned. During the most important tactical examination of the term, this human looked like she was watching a documentary about paint drying. A few students noticed. I saw a Krellian 2 rows back glance at her with what might have been contempt. Like, look at the human, does not even care enough to pay attention. Commander Thrace's 3 eyes tracked across the room one more time. Students were starting to relax, figuring their presentations were done. They had performed adequately. Time to coast through everyone else's assessments. Then Thrace's gaze locked onto row 3. Student Chen, he said, and something in his tone made the entire room go quiet. You have been remarkably patient. Please, share your assessment. Kira stood up slowly, like someone who had been waiting for this exact moment and was going to savor every second of it. She looked at the holographic projection. Then she looked at us, and she smiled. Not a friendly smile. Oh no! This was the smile of someone who was about to ruin everybody's day and enjoyed doing it. Well, Kira said, her voice absolutely dripping with sarcasm. This is going to be fun. Kira walked down to the central platform with the kind of casual energy that made it very clear she was not even slightly intimidated by this whole situation. She stopped next to Commander Thrace, glanced at the holographic scenario, then turned to face the rest of us with that same dangerous smile still plastered on her face. Okay, she said, dragging out the word like she was about to explain something very simple to very small children. So, I have been sitting here for the last 20 minutes, listening to all of you pick your favorite shiny target and convince yourselves you are tactical geniuses. And I have got to say, it has been absolutely fascinating. Like watching people fail the same test in 60 different ways. A few students shifted uncomfortably. I saw Kovex's expression darken. Kira pointed at the Krellian shock trooper in the hologram. Let us start with everyone's favorite. Big guy, big gun, big obvious threat. Calvex. You spent 6 minutes explaining how dangerous this guy is. Know how long he would last in actual combat? She paused for effect. 12 seconds. Maybe 15 if he is lucky. Carvex started to object, but Kira just kept talking, her voice cutting through the room like a scalpel. That Mark 7 plasma cannon weighs 42 kilograms, requires a 3.5-second charge cycle between shots. He is positioned behind a storefront, which means his back is to a building with windows that provide access. His cover is frontal only, which is great if everyone attacks from the street like polite little soldiers, but absolutely useless when someone comes through the building behind him. She zoomed in on the hologram, highlighting structural details. Look at his stance. Weight distribution is all wrong for rapid repositioning. He is set up for sustained fire down those 2 streets, which means he is committed to that position. One flashbang through the window behind him, he is blind and deaf. 2 seconds later he is dead. That plasma cannon becomes a very expensive paperweight. The confidence in the room was starting to evaporate like water on a hot plate. Kira turned her attention to the Vox sniper. Silith, you made a decent argument for the Mindweaver, but half of you picked the sniper. So let us talk about why that is also wrong. She gestured at the elevated position. Yes. Great sightlines. Yes, excellent targeting capabilities. Also, completely static positioning with exactly one access route to that rooftop. See that stairwell? That is the only way up or down. The Vox is 3 stories above ground level with no rapid exit strategy. You know what we call that in actual tactical operations. Kira's smile got wider. A coffin with a view. Several students were taking notes now, and not the good kind of notes. The oh no, I got this completely wrong kind of notes. Vox biology requires a stable firing platform for those fancy optical enhancements to work properly. Kira continued. Absolutely ruthless now, which means the sniper cannot reposition quickly without losing targeting efficiency. 1 smoke grenade blocks visual acquisition. 1 incendiary round forces evacuation from that position. And the second they start moving down that stairwell, they are in a fatal funnel with 0 cover and predictable movement pattern. Combat effectiveness drops to basically nothing. I was starting to feel a very uncomfortable sensation in my primary stomach, the one I use for digesting food and apparently my own arrogance. Kira was not done. Not even close. The Scaran Berserker, she said, shaking her head. Oh boy. Yes, very scary in close quarters. Dual vibroblades, pain immunity. Lots of rage. You know what else the Scaran have? Predictable attack patterns driven by biological imperative. They charge. That is their whole thing. They charge at the nearest threat with maximum aggression and 0 tactical flexibility. She highlighted the Berserker's position in the hologram. Current location is in an open plaza with 40 meters of clear ground in every direction. You know what happens to a close-quarters combatant with no ranged capability when they are standing in an open kill zone? They become target practice. 12 seconds. Same as the shock trooper. Probably less because they will literally run toward whoever is shooting at them. My second stomach was getting involved now. This was becoming physically uncomfortable. The Mindweaver coordinator, Kira said, looking directly at Zilith. You made the best argument out of everyone here, I will give you that. Force multiplication, shared awareness, communication advantages. All true, all tactically relevant. Zilith's form brightened slightly. Something like vindication, also completely irrelevant. Kira continued, destroying that moment immediately, because Mindweavers have an effective telepathic range of about 50 meters in urban environments with all the electromagnetic interference, and you are hovering 2 meters off the ground, which makes you the most visible target in the entire scenario. No cover, no concealment, limited mobility. First thing any competent squad does is eliminate the coordinator. You die first, always, because you are both the most valuable target and the easiest one to hit. Zilith's form dimmed considerably. Kira pointed at the Thalorian scout. Scout is positioned in a doorway with active camouflage. Great, except active camouflage creates a thermal signature, uses power cells that emit detectable radiation, and provides 0 protection against area effect weapons. 1 thermobaric grenade into that doorway, camouflage does not matter anymore. Also, scouts are lightly armed support personnel. Useful? Yes. Greatest threat? Not even remotely. I was no longer taking notes. I was just sitting there watching my entire tactical assessment get systematically demolished by a human who looked like she had been half asleep 5 minutes ago. And the combat engineer, Kira said, turning to the Darvathian in the hologram. Environmental control. improvised explosives, creative problem solving. Sure. No, what else? They are crouched, next to a vehicle wreckage, working on something, which means they are distracted and stationary. Engineers are dangerous when they have time to prepare. This one is exposed, focused on a task, and not maintaining situational awareness. Combat effectiveness in the next 30 seconds, basically zero. The room had gone completely silent. Even Commander Thrace looked like he was enjoying this, which was somehow more terrifying than if he had been angry. Kira crossed her arms and looked at all of us with an expression of profound disappointment. So, to summarize, she said, voice heavy with sarcasm, every single one of you picked targets based on what looked scary, what had the biggest weapons, or what fit your preconceived notions about combat effectiveness. You analyzed equipment and positioning and species advantages. You made detailed tactical arguments that sounded really smart. She paused, letting that hang in the air, and every single one of you would be dead before you realized you were looking at the wrong person. My discomfort had evolved into something approaching dread, because I had a horrible feeling I knew where this was going. The greatest threat in this scenario, Kira said, her smile turning absolutely predatory, is the exhausted-looking human medical officer sitting on a pile of rubble who none of you even considered for half a second. Oh no. Oh no no no. Kira zoomed in on the human medical officer in the hologram, and suddenly details I had completely ignored became horrifyingly obvious. Let us talk about what you all missed, Kira said, her tone shifting from sarcastic to clinical. First, positioning. The medic is sitting on rubble that provides elevation, hard cover from 3 directions, and unobstructed sight lines to every single combatant in the scenario. That is not exhaustion. That is calculated field placement. She highlighted the medical pack. Second, equipment analysis. Standard medical pack, sure. Also contains polymer composite that is structurally identical to demolition charges. Handheld scanner. Doubles as a targeting designator. Those supply pouches, perfect size for concealed sidearms or breaching tools. My brain was trying very hard to reject this information, but the evidence was right there in the hologram. Third, body language and behavior. Kira continued. The medic is not checking wounded, not coordinating evacuation, not doing anything a medical officer would actually do in this scenario. They are sitting still, scanning the environment and maintaining a relaxed posture that provides optimal reaction time. That is not a non-combatant. That is someone pretending to be a non-combatant while running threat assessment on everyone around them. She turned to face Commander Thrace. The human medical officer is using the single most effective tactical advantage in any combat scenario. They are being underestimated. Every actual threat in this scenario is focused on each other. Nobody is watching the medic, which means the medic can engage at their discretion with complete tactical surprise. Thrace's mandibles clicked. Student Chen, you have made your theoretical case. However, theory and practice are different things.
Oh no, I knew that tone.
Demonstrate your assessment, Thrace said. You have access to training equipment. Show us how this medic would neutralize the other 6 combatants. You have 90 seconds. Kira's smile could have cut steel. I only need 70. What happened next was the most educational 5 minutes of my entire academy career. And I mean that in the worst possible way. Kira moved to the equipment lockers at the side of the chamber and pulled out training versions of standard gear. Simulation grenades, practice blades, dummy charges, all the non-lethal stuff we used for practical exercises. Then she walked back to the projection platform and just started working. Engagement sequence begins, she announced, her voice flat and professional now. Shock trooper is first priority. High threat, static position, predictable field of fire. She mimed pulling something from a medical pouch, made a throwing motion toward the holographic building behind the Krellian. Flashbang through rear window. 3 seconds. She counted it out, then moved. Trooper is disoriented. Weapon is a liability now because he cannot see targets. Close distance during confusion period. Neutralize with close quarters technique. Kira demonstrated a strike pattern on a practice dummy. Brutal efficiency, no wasted movement. 7 seconds total. Shock trooper eliminated. Acquire plasma cannon for next phase. She was not joking around. Every movement was precise, practiced, terrifyingly competent. Vox Sniper has visual on plaza but limited mobility. Kira continued, picking up a training rifle. Use acquired plasma cannon, single shot into stairwell support structure. Building stability compromised. Sniper forced to evacuate or die in collapse. 12 seconds elapsed. She dropped the rifle and grabbed simulation grenades. Scoran Berserker will charge on contact. Predictable. directional mine placement along charge path, detonate on approach. Berserker's pain immunity is irrelevant when major muscle groups are destroyed. 18 seconds elapsed. My forearms had gone completely numb. This was not a demonstration. This was a surgical breakdown of how to kill 6 people in under 30 seconds. Mindweaver coordinator is priority target now, Kira said, moving through the scenario with mechanical precision. Elevated, visible, limited mobility. Standard rifle shot, center mass. Telepathic abilities do not stop bullets. 22 seconds elapsed. She shifted position, grabbed a practice blade. Thalorian scout is using active camouflage in doorway. Thermal signature is visible. Fragmentation grenade into confined space. Camouflage irrelevant. 28 seconds. 1 target left. Combat engineer is distracted. Working on vehicle wreckage, not maintaining awareness, Kira said. Standard approach from blindside. Close quarters neutralization before they register threat presence. 34 seconds total elapsed. She stopped, turned to face all of us, not even breathing hard. 34 seconds, she repeated. All 6 combatants neutralized. Medical officer maintains non-combatant appearance until engagement begins. Uses tactical surprise and opponent overconfidence. Eliminates threats in order of capability and awareness. By the time anyone realizes the medic is the problem, they are already dead. The silence in that room was so complete I could hear my own circulatory system. Commander Thrace nodded slowly. All 3 eyes fixed on Kira. Accurate assessment. Flawless demonstration. Textbook application of deception doctrine. He turned to address the rest of us, and his voice carried across the chamber like a funeral dirge. This examination was designed to teach you one critical lesson. The most dangerous opponent is never the one who looks dangerous. It is the one you do not see coming. Kira walked back to row 3 and sat down, looking exactly as bored as she had at the start of class, and I finally understood why she had been so amused. We had all failed this test before it even started. Nobody moved. Nobody spoke. 60 students sat in complete silence, processing what we had just witnessed. Commander Thrace let that silence stretch out for a good 10 seconds before he spoke again. Humans have been part of the galactic community for 62 years, he said, his voice carrying weight now. In that time, they have participated in 14 major conflicts. They have won 13 of them, not through superior technology, not through larger numbers. They win because they fight differently than everyone else. He gestured at the holographic scenario, still frozen with all 7 combatants visible. Every species in this room evolved with certain combat doctrines. Krellians use overwhelming firepower. Vox rely on precision and superiority. Scaran use biological advantages. Mindweavers coordinate. Thalorians, scout. Dorvathians engineer solutions. Thrace's 3 eyes swept across all of us. Humans cheat. They lie. They pretend to be something they are not. They use your assumptions against you. They will smile at you, offer medical assistance, gain your trust, and then eliminate you before you understand what happened. This is not dishonorable. This is survival evolution from a planet that tried to kill them for 200,000 years. I looked at Kira, still sitting in row 3 with that same bored expression, except now I understood what I was actually looking at. Not disinterest. Assessment. She had been evaluating every single person in this room from the moment we walked in, running threat calculations, identifying vulnerabilities, planning engagement sequences, and we had dismissed her as irrelevant. The greatest tactical mistake you can make, Thrace concluded, is assuming you know which target matters. Underestimating Earthborn species is the fastest way to become a casualty statistic. Remember this lesson. Your life may depend on it. Class dismissed. I walked out of that chamber with a new understanding burned into my brain. Never, ever assume the quiet one is not the dangerous one. Never assume the person who looks harmless actually is harmless. And never ever underestimate a human who is sitting calmly in row 3, watching you make mistakes, because they are not bored. They are just waiting for you to finish being wrong.